When medicine fails, a boy from the streets challenges everything science knows. And what happens next changes the fate of an entire family forever. Ethan Miller adjusted the knot of his tie for the third time that morning, a habit he'd developed over the last few months whenever he left St. Jude's Hospital. The mechanical movement of his hands contrasted with the weight he felt in his chest, a feeling that not even his Italian suits could conceal. At 52, the most respected businessman in Springfield walked the hospital corridors like a ghost of his former self. 6 months. That was how long Elizabeth had been in that state, motionless, breathing with the aid of machines that emitted constant, monotonous sounds. His 16-year-old daughter, who used to fill the house with laughter and arguments about the stray cats she always brought home, was now just a silent body between white sheets. The meeting with the medical team had ended like all the others. No definitive answers, just technical terms that didn't explain why a healthy young woman simply wouldn't wake up. Dr. Helen Carter, the neurologist in charge of the case, had repeated the same words as always about patience and hope, but Ethan noticed the growing concern in her eyes. The grey August sky covered Springfield when Ethan left the hospital. The city continued its normal routine, indifferent to the drama consuming his life. People hurried along the sidewalks, cars honked in traffic, and the world kept turning while his remained static in that hospital room. That's when the boy appeared. Small, thin, in clothes that had seen better days, he emerged from behind one of the main entrance columns. His bare feet contrasted with the clean hospital floor, and his messy hair framed a face that seemed to carry more experience than his apparent 12 years should allow. "Liam," the boy said, his voice firm despite his fragile appearance. Ethan stopped, surprised. No one approached him like that, especially not a street kid. His first reaction was annoyance. After months of pressure, pitying looks and empty words of comfort, the last thing he needed was another beggar. "How do you know my name?" he asked, keeping his distance. "I know about your daughter too," the boy replied, not averting his gaze. "Elizabeth. She's been sleeping for a long time." The coldness Ethan felt in his chest turned into something sharper, almost anger. How dare this child talk about Elizabeth? How did he know details that only the family and doctors knew? "Listen, kid," Ethan began, controlling his tone of voice. "I don't know what you want, but this isn't the time or the place. I can help her wake up." The words dropped like a bomb in the morning silence. Ethan felt the world around him slow down. Cars kept passing, people kept walking, but everything seemed distant, unreal. "What?" he murmured, not believing what he'd heard. "Your daughter, Elizabeth. I can make her wake up," the boy repeated, this time with even more conviction. "But you have to let me try." Ethan studied the boy's face, looking for signs of lying, a cruel joke, anything that explained this absurd claim. But he only found a seriousness that didn't match his apparent age. "You don't know what you're talking about," Ethan said, beginning to walk away. "Elizabeth is being treated by the best doctors in New York. If they can't because they don't know how," the boy interrupted, following him. "But I do. I've always known." There was something in the child's voice that made Ethan hesitate. It wasn't arrogance or boastfulness. It was a silent certainty, almost melancholy, as if carrying that knowledge was more of a burden than a gift. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, finally stopping. "Kian." "Kian what?" "Just Kian. I never needed anything else." Ethan looked around, aware that some people were starting to notice the conversation between a well-dressed man and a street boy. The image wasn't good for someone in his position. But there was something in those dark eyes that stopped him from simply walking away. "Where do you live, Kian?" "In several places. Shelters, sometimes on the street. Depends on the night." The answer was given without self-pity, just as a fact of life. Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. 6 months ago, his biggest concern was expanding his construction business. Now he was talking to a street boy about the possibility of curing his daughter. "And why should I believe you?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Because you've tried everything and nothing has worked," Kian replied. "And because deep down you know something different is happening with her. The doctors can't explain it, but you feel it." Ethan closed his eyes. It was true. In recent months, a strange feeling accompanied him whenever he was in Elizabeth's room. As if she were there, but not completely. As if a part of her was somewhere else, waiting for something or someone. Even if I wanted to believe you, Ethan said, opening his eyes, how would you do it? You're a child. Age doesn't matter for some things, Kian replied. You let me try or your daughter keeps sleeping. The brutal simplicity of the statement hit Ethan like a punch. There was no threat in the boy's words, just a cold statement of reality. Ethan looked at the hospital building behind him, then at the boy in front of him. 6 months of consultations, exams, specialists. 6 months of hope slowly draining away. 6 months of a daughter who seemed increasingly distant, despite being right there breathing, her heart beating. If I take you to her, Ethan said slowly, and you can't do anything, I never want to see you here again. Understood? Kian nodded. And if you succeed, Ethan paused, unable to complete the sentence. The possibility seemed too big, too dangerous to be verbalized. I will succeed, Kian said with a simplicity that bordered on the absurd. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling that he was about to make the craziest decision of his life. But looking at that boy, seeing the silent conviction in his eyes, he realized he had nothing left to lose. Let's go, he finally said, turning toward the hospital. As they walked together through the corridors, Ethan knew by heart he couldn't help but think about the reaction the scene would cause. The businessman Ethan Miller, known for his rationality and pragmatism, walking alongside a street boy who claimed he could cure his daughter. But for the first time in 6 months, Ethan felt something he'd forgotten how to feel: hope. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll continue. Nurse Laura almost dropped the medication tray when she saw Ethan entering the neurology ward, accompanied by a barefoot boy. Having worked on that floor for 6 months, she'd gotten used to the businessman's silent routine. He always arrived at the same time, stayed 2 hours beside his daughter, and left without speaking to anyone. Mr. Miller, she called, approaching hesitantly. Is there a problem? No, Laura, this is Kian. He's visiting Elizabeth with me today. The nurse looked from Ethan to the boy, trying to process the situation. For months, only close family and the medical team had access to Elizabeth's room. The presence of an unknown child broke all hospital protocols. But, sir, I need to check with Dr. Carter. I take full responsibility, Ethan interrupted, his voice carrying the authority he naturally wielded in the business world. It's just a visit. Kian remained silent beside Ethan, watching everything intently. His eyes scanned the corridors, the machines, the faces of the people passing by. He seemed to be absorbing every detail of that environment that was completely new to him. Room 314 was silent when they entered. The curtains let in a soft morning light, and the constant sound of the machines created a monotonous symphony that Ethan had learned to hate. There was Elizabeth, exactly as he had left her the day before, motionless, breathing through tubes with the serene face of someone deeply asleep. Kian stopped at the room entrance, as if struck by something invisible. His pupils dilated slightly, and he tilted his head to one side as if listening to something no one else could hear. She's dreaming, Kian said softly, stepping toward the bed. The doctors say people in a coma don't dream, Ethan replied, observing the boy's every move. The doctors don't know everything. Dr. Helen Carter chose exactly that moment to enter the room, followed closely by Dr. Richard Stone, who always found a way to show up when something interesting was happening. The neurologist stopped abruptly when she saw the scene, Ethan beside a street boy who was approaching her patient. Ethan, what is going on here? Dr. Helen asked, her voice mixing concern and professional authority. Doctor, this is Kian. He has a theory about Elizabeth's condition. Dr. Richard stepped forward, his eyes shining with a mixture of curiosity and opportunism. A theory. Mr. Miller, with all due respect, but this is a hospital environment, not a place for amateur experiments. No one mentioned experiments, Ethan retorted, feeling the tension rise in the room. Just a visit. Dr. Helen approached the bed, positioning herself between Kian and Elizabeth. Ethan, I understand your despair, but I cannot allow unauthorized people to have direct contact with the patient. There are protocols, risks of infection. I won't hurt her, Kian said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. His voice was calm, almost whispered, but carried a conviction that made everyone in the room turn to him. Kid, you don't understand, Dr. Richard began, adopting a condescending tone. This young woman is in critical condition. Her condition requires specialized medical care, not visits from beggars, Kian completed, his dark eyes fixed on the doctor without showing anger, just an old sadness. The silence that followed was embarrassing. Dr. Richard blushed slightly, realizing the implicit cruelty in his words. Dr. Helen sighed, recognizing the delicate situation they were in. Ethan felt something stir in his chest. For months, he had passively accepted the medical decisions, the technical explanations, the inflexible protocols, but seeing that boy treated with contempt for something he couldn't control, something awakened in his memory. A memory of when he himself had been judged by his appearance long ago, when he started from nothing. 5 minutes, Ethan said firmly. 5 minutes, and you can stay here and observe if you want. Dr. Helen hesitated, looking alternately at Ethan and Kian. She had known the businessman for 6 months, knew of his rationality, his pragmatism. Seeing him defend a street boy was completely out of character. Ethan, this goes against all protocol. 5 minutes, Ethan repeated. After that, if nothing happens, we will never mention this subject again. The tension in the room was palpable. Dr. Richard crossed his arms, clearly disapproving of the whole situation, but smart enough to realize that any more direct opposition could harm his relationship with one of the hospital's most important sponsors. Dr. Helen, on the other hand, weighed the professional implications against a father's evident despair. Just 5 minutes, she finally conceded. And I'm not leaving the room. Kian nodded, grateful, and approached the bed. His steps were silent, almost reverent. When he reached Elizabeth's side, he stopped again as if asking permission for something. Can I touch her hand? He asked, looking at Ethan. You can. Kian extended his small hand and carefully covered Elizabeth's hand. His dark skin contrasted with the girl's paleness. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The doctors exchanged skeptical glances. Ethan held his breath, and the sound of the machines continued their constant rhythm. Then Kian began to speak. Hi, Elizabeth. My name is Kian. Your dad is very worried about you. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. He comes here every day, you know. He just sits in that chair there, just looking at you. Sometimes he talks about the cats you like to take care of. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. How did Kian know about the cats? He had never mentioned it to anyone at the hospital. He told me you want to be a vet, Kian continued, still holding Elizabeth's hand. It must be cool to take care of animals. I always wanted a dog, but on the street it's hard to take care of even yourself. Dr. Helen watched the monitors closely, looking for any change in Elizabeth's vital signs. Everything remained stable, within the patterns that had become familiar over the last few months. You're dreaming, right? Kian asked, his voice even lower now. I dream a lot too. Sometimes I dream about places I've never seen, about people I've never met. It's strange, but it's like I can see things that are going to happen or that have already happened somewhere else. It was at that moment that Dr. Helen noticed something different on the cardiac monitor. A small, almost imperceptible change in rhythm, but definitely a change. Kian, Ethan said softly, time is almost up. The boy nodded, but didn't let go of Elizabeth's hand. I'll come back tomorrow if your dad lets me. And we'll talk more. I have a lot of stories to tell, and I think you have some to tell me too. He gently released Elizabeth's hand and moved away from the bed. The monitors quickly returned to the normal rhythm, as if nothing had happened. Done, Kian said, looking at Ethan. I can leave now. Dr. Richard laughed, a harsh sound that broke the tension of the moment. Well, that was interesting, but as you can see, nothing really happened. Yes, it did, Dr. Helen murmured, still looking at the monitors. There was a change in heart rhythm, small but measurable. Coincidence, Dr. Richard said quickly. Fluctuations like that are normal in patients in these conditions. Normal but not recorded in the last 6 months, Dr. Helen retorted, making notes on her clipboard. Ethan watched the discussion between the doctors, but his attention was divided. Part of him wanted to believe that something had happened, that those 5 minutes had been different from all the moments he had spent beside Elizabeth in the last few months. Another part, the rational part that had built his empire, insisted that it was just coincidence, self-deception, despair masked as hope. Kian remained silent, observing everything with that strange serenity that didn't seem to match his age. When Dr. Richard finished speaking, technically explaining why this was all a waste of time, the boy headed for the door. Mr. Miller, he called, stopping at the threshold. When you want to find me, I'm near the Cathedral Square. But if we don't see each other again, that's okay too. Elizabeth knows you love her. That's what matters." And he left, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Dr. Helen was the first to break the silence. "Ethan, this boy is different. There's something about him I can't explain." "Different how?" Ethan asked. He knew things no one mentioned here. About the cats, about Elizabeth's dreams of being a vet, and that change on the monitor. "It was a coincidence," Dr. Richard interrupted. "Helen, you're letting the emotion of the moment get to you." But Dr. Helen didn't seem convinced. Her eyes remained fixed on the monitors, as if waiting for something else to happen. Ethan left the hospital that afternoon with more questions than answers. But for the first time in months, the questions weren't just about illness and despair. They were about possibilities, about connections that medicine couldn't explain, about a boy who had appeared out of nowhere with an impossible promise. And in the stillness of his car, driving through the familiar streets of Springfield, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. The next day, he would return to the hospital, and he would look for Kian in the Cathedral Square. The Cathedral Square was bustling with the typical movement of a Thursday afternoon in Springfield. Street vendors offered pastries and sugarcane juice, children ran between the benches while their mothers talked, and the church bell marked the hours with its familiar sound. Ethan parked the car and scanned the area, looking for a small figure that had occupied his thoughts all night. He found Kian sitting under a tree, sharing a sandwich with a stray dog that seemed to know him well. The boy noticed Ethan's approach and waved, as if expecting him. "I knew you would come," Kian said, offering a piece of bread to the dog. "This one is Ribeye. He lives here in the square too." Ethan observed the scene, a street boy sharing his meager meal with an abandoned animal. There was a naturalness in that gesture that contrasted with the harshness of the life Kian apparently led. "How did you know I would come?" Ethan asked, sitting beside him on the bench. "Because you have hope now. Before, when you came from the hospital, you seemed dead inside. Yesterday, when you left, there was a different light in your eyes." The observation was made without pretense, but it hit Ethan hard. It was true. For the first time in months, he had slept without the constant weight of despair. "Kian, where did you sleep last night?" "At the Santa Cruz Street shelter. When there's a vacancy, they let us stay." Ethan was silent for a few minutes, watching the movement in the square. A part of him still resisted what he was about to propose. It was crazy, a complete break from his orderly routine. But another part, a voice that had been silent for a long time, insisted that this was the right thing to do. "Would you like to stay at my house?" he finally asked. "Temporarily, until we better understand what is happening with Elizabeth." Kian stopped petting Ribeye and looked directly at Ethan. "Are you sure? You don't know me well." "You're right. I don't know you. But 6 months ago, I didn't know myself either. I discovered that I can be someone different from who I always thought I was." "And your family? Will they accept a street boy in the house?" Ethan hesitated. Patricia had moved to her mother's house after Elizabeth's accident, unable to deal with the constant pressure of the hospital and the unfruitful treatments. The house, which had once been full of life and conversation, now housed only him and Rose, the housekeeper who had worked with the family for more than 20 years. "Rose might find it strange at first," Ethan admitted, "but she's a good person. And as for Patricia, well, she doesn't live here anymore. Because of Elizabeth, because of a lot of things. Elizabeth was just the last." Kian nodded, as if he understood more than his words revealed. "All right, but if you ever regret it, just say so. I understand." Ethan held out his hand to Kian. "So it's a deal?" The boy shook the offered hand, and Ethan felt the rough, calloused skin from a life no child should have to live. Ethan's house was in the Biltmore neighborhood, one of the most upscale areas of Springfield. It was a modern construction, all glass and straight lines, reflecting the professional success he had built over the years. When the automatic gate opened and they entered the garage, Kian was silent, observing everything with curiosity. "That's very big," the boy commented, getting out of the car. "Too big for 2 people, Ethan agreed, an involuntary melancholy tinting his voice. Rose was preparing dinner when they entered through the kitchen. The 60-year-old woman with grey hair, always pulled back in an impeccable bun, almost dropped the pan when she saw Ethan accompanied by Kian. "My God, Mr. Miller, you scared me," she exclaimed, putting her hand to her chest. "Who is this boy?" "Rose, this is Kian. He's going to stay with us for a few days." The housekeeper looked from Ethan to Kian, trying to process the information. In more than 2 decades working for the family, she had never seen Ethan make such an impulsive decision. "Stay how, sir? Here in the house?" "Yes, he'll use the guest room." Rose noticed the state of Kian's clothes, his bare feet, his messy hair. But she also noticed something in the boy's posture that made her hesitate before protesting. There was dignity there despite everything. "The boy needs a bath," she finally said, her voice softer. "And clean clothes." "Thank you, Mrs. Rose," Kian said, surprising her with his politeness. "Sorry for the trouble." "It's no trouble," Rose replied, lying a little but touched by the boy's politeness. "Come on, I'll show you where everything is." While Rose took Kian to the guest room, Ethan stayed in the living room, observing his house with new eyes. It had been months since he had noticed the details. Elizabeth's photos on the shelf, her drawings stuck on the refrigerator, the cat toys she insisted on keeping scattered around the house, even after they had run away or been given away. Kian came down for dinner transformed. The bath had revealed a younger face than Ethan had imagined, and the borrowed clothes from Elizabeth, although a little large, gave him an almost normal appearance of a 12-year-old boy. "Do the clothes fit well?" Rose asked, serving dinner. "They're great." "Thank you." During the meal, Ethan discovered more about Kian. The boy had lived in an orphanage until he was 8 when he ran away because he couldn't pretend to be like the others anymore. Since then, he had lived on the streets, surviving on small jobs and the kindness of strangers. "And your family?" "Your parents?" Ethan asked. "I never knew anything. The nuns at the orphanage said I was left on the doorstep when I was a baby. And these gifts you have? Have they always existed?" Kian chewed thoughtfully before answering. "As long as I can remember. At the orphanage, sometimes I knew when someone was going to get sick, or when it was going to rain, or when we were going to have visitors. People found it strange. They said I was weird." Rose, who had remained silent, watched the conversation with growing interest. There was something familiar about that boy, something she couldn't identify. The next day, the three returned to St. Jude's Hospital. This time, Kian wore clean clothes and shoes, which somewhat lessened the strange looks from the staff. Dr. Helen received them in Elizabeth's room with a curious expression. "How did she spend the night?" Ethan asked. "Strangely agitated," the doctor replied. "Not in a bad way, but different, as if she was very actively dreaming." Kian approached the bed and again held Elizabeth's hand. "She was waiting for me," he said simply. "What do you mean?" Dr. Helen asked. "In her dreams. She knew I would come back." Dr. Helen exchanged an intrigued look with Ethan. As a coma patient, Elizabeth shouldn't be having such structured dreams. Kian began to talk to Elizabeth again, telling her about his night at Ethan's house, about Rose and her kindness, about how strange it was to sleep in a real bed after so long. And then something extraordinary happened. Elizabeth's fingers moved. It wasn't a reflex or involuntary movement. It was a deliberate movement, almost as if she was trying to squeeze Kian's hand. Dr. Helen was paralyzed watching the monitor. Elizabeth's brain waves showed activity that had not been recorded in months. "My God," she murmured, starting to make frantic notes. "Ethan, are you seeing this?" Ethan couldn't speak. Tears ran down his face as he watched his daughter's fingers move slightly. "Hi, Elizabeth," Kian whispered, his voice full of contained joy. "I knew you were listening." The movement lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to change everything. Dr. Helen immediately requested new exams. Dr. Richard was urgently called in, and a controlled agitation took over the neurology floor. "This is impossible," Dr. Richard murmured, analyzing the records. "Patients in deep coma do not show this type of voluntary motor response." "But she did," Dr. Helen said firmly. "And I documented everything." That night at Ethan's house, Kian was unusually quiet. During dinner, Rose noticed that he had barely touched his food. "Is everything okay, boy?" she asked. "Yes, Mrs. Rose, it's just that sometimes it's very tiring." "What is tiring?" "Feeling what other people feel, seeing what they see." Elizabeth is trying to wake up, but it's hard for her. It's like she has to cross a very dark place to get here. Ethan stopped eating. "You can see this with not see as I see. It's different. It's like I can be there with her in that dark place." Rose discreetly crossed herself. She had raised Ethan since he was little. knew all his phases, his changes, his successes and failures, but she had never seen him so transformed as in the last 2 days. "Kian," Ethan said slowly, "do you have any idea why you can do this?" The boy was silent for a long time, playing with the food on his plate. When he finally answered, his voice was laden with a sadness that did not match his age. "I think it's because I was also lost in the dark, and someone helped me find the way back." That night, Ethan had the first dream in months that wasn't a nightmare about Elizabeth's accident. He dreamed of a soft light, distant voices, and the feeling that something very important was about to happen. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. We'll continue. The news spread through St. Jude's Hospital like wildfire. In less than a week, Elizabeth had shown 3 episodes of voluntary movement, always during Kian's visits. Neurological exams showed increasing brain activity, and Dr. Helen had meticulously documented every change. In the hospital meeting room, a heated discussion took place among the members of the medical team. "This goes against everything we know about neurology," argued Dr. Richard Stone, slamming his folder on the table. "We cannot allow charlatanism to be associated with the name of this institution." "Charlatanism?" Dr. Helen replicated, her cheeks flushed with indignation. "Richard, the data is there. The movements are real, the brain activity is measurable. Whatever the explanation, something is happening." Dr. Edward Miller, the hospital's clinical director, sighed heavily. "Helen, I understand your scientific enthusiasm, but we have to consider the implications. If this leaks to the press—" "It already leaked," Dr. Richard interrupted with a satisfied smile. "I received a call from the Springfield Journal an hour ago. They want to do a story about the miracle boy." The silence that followed was tense. Dr. Helen closed her eyes, realizing that the situation had completely escaped control. Meanwhile, at Ethan's house, Rose was tidying the room that had belonged to Elizabeth when she was younger, looking for clothes that might fit Kian better. It was while going through a box of old photographs that she found something that perplexed her. It was a faded photo of Ethan at 20 during a graduation trip. Beside him, smiling at the camera, was a young man almost identical to Kian. The resemblance was so striking that Rose had to sit on the bed, feeling her legs tremble. "It can't be," she murmured, examining the photo more closely. On the back, written in Ethan's handwriting, was, "Me and Mark Aspen, 1992. Rose knew the story. Mark had been Ethan's best friend in college, almost a brother. They had lost touch after graduation, when Mark decided to travel inland working on social projects. Ethan had mentioned a few times in the early years of his marriage that he missed his friend. But the resemblance between Mark and Kian was impossible to ignore. The same dark eyes, the same face shape, even the way he tilted his head when thoughtful. Rose quickly put the photo away when she heard Ethan arriving with Kian from the hospital. She needed time to process that discovery. "How was it today?" she asked, trying to keep her voice normal. "Incredible," Ethan replied, his voice full of emotion. Elizabeth moved her head. Slightly, but it was clearly intentional. Kian, however, looked exhausted. His dark circles were more pronounced, and he moved with the slowness of someone very tired. "Are you okay, boy?" Rose asked, touching his forehead to check if he had a fever. "Just tired." It's a lot of effort for her, too. Every time she tries to communicate, it's like she has to use all the energy she has. Ethan watched Kian with growing concern. In recent days, as Elizabeth showed more signs of improvement, the boy seemed more debilitated. "Maybe we should take a break," Ethan suggested. "You need to rest." "No." Kian's response was surprisingly vehement. "If we stop now, she might go back to that dark place. And this time she might not be able to get out." That night, Ethan received a call from Patricia. It was the first time they had spoken since she had left home 2 months after the accident. "Ethan, I'm seeing strange things at the hospital. Rose called me, said you brought a street boy into our house." "Patricia, it's complicated." "Complicated? Ethan, our daughter has been in a coma for 6 months. And you're playing foster dad?" Ethan took a deep breath, trying to control his irritation. This boy might be helping Elizabeth. "Helping how? With magic? With miracles?" "Ethan, for God's sake, you've always been a rational person. And you've always been a person who ran away when things got tough," Ethan replied, immediately regretting the words. The silence on the other end of the line was long and painful. "I'm going to the hospital tomorrow," Patricia finally said. "I want to see what's going on with my own eyes." The next day, St. Jude's Hospital was agitated. Journalists had gathered at the entrance, and security had to be reinforced. The story of the boy who wakes up coma patients had spread on social media, attracting curious people and skeptics in equal measure. Ethan arrived at the hospital through the employee parking lot, avoiding the reporters. Patricia was already there, talking to Dr. Helen in the corridor. "Ethan," Patricia greeted coldly when she saw him approach with Kian. "Patricia." The reply was equally cold. Dr. Helen interrupted the tense moment. "Before we enter Elizabeth's room, there's something I need to show you." The results of the blood tests arrived today. She led them to her office and opened a folder on the table. "We did some routine genetic tests on Kian, just as a medical precaution. And we found something interesting." Ethan and Patricia leaned forward, expectant. "Kian and Elizabeth share some quite specific genetic markers. It's not a direct relationship, but there are similarities that are statistically improbable between unrelated people." "What does that mean?" Ethan asked. "It means that somehow you might have some kind of distant family connection, or—" Dr. Helen hesitated. "Or it's an extraordinary coincidence." Patricia looked at Kian with new curiosity. "Kian, are you sure you don't know anything about your family?" The boy shook his head. "I only know that I was left at the orphanage when I was a baby. The nuns never knew who my parents were." At that moment, Rose appeared in the corridor, breathless from having rushed up the stairs. She carried a small bag and seemed determined. "Mrs. Rose?" "What are you doing here?" Ethan asked, surprised. "I need to talk to all of you," she said, looking directly at Kian. "I found something you need to see." She opened the bag and took out the old photograph. "Ethan, do you remember this photo?" Ethan took the photograph and turned pale. "Mark, but where did you find this?" "In Elizabeth's old things." Ethan looked closely at the photo and then at Kian. Everyone looked alternately at the photograph and the boy. The resemblance was undeniable. "My God," Patricia murmured. "It's like they're the same person." "Who is Mark?" Kian asked, his voice almost a whisper. Ethan sat down heavily in the chair. "My best friend in college. We lost contact more than 20 years ago. He was almost a brother to me." "And where is he now?" Dr. Helen asked. "I don't know. The last I heard was that he was working with needy communities inland. That was about 15 years ago." Kian took the photo with trembling hands. "He looks like me." "Very much," Ethan agreed, his voice full of emotion. "Kian, what year were you born?" The nuns said it was 2013, but they weren't sure. Ethan quickly did mental math. "Mark would be the right age to be your father." The silence that followed was loaded with possibilities and implications. Patricia was the first to speak. "If Mark is Kian's father, that would explain the genetic connection with Elizabeth. You were so close that you were practically family." "But that still doesn't explain how Kian can do what he does," Dr. Helen said. "Maybe it doesn't need an explanation," Kian said softly. "Maybe some things just happen when they need to happen." Ethan looked at the boy with a mixture of affection and perplexity. If Kian was really Mark's son, that changed everything. He wasn't just a street boy he had temporarily taken in. He was possibly the son of the man who had been like a brother to him. "Kian," Ethan said slowly, "I would like you to stay with us. Not temporarily. Forever." The boy looked at Ethan, then at Patricia, then at Rose. "Even without knowing if I can continue helping Elizabeth?" "Especially for that," Ethan replied. "Family isn't just about blood. It's about being present when people need you." Patricia approached Kian and for the first time smiled at him. "If you're Mark's son, then you've been part of our family for a long time. We just didn't know it." That afternoon when they visited Elizabeth, something different happened. As soon as Kian touched her hand, she opened her eyes. Not for long, just a few seconds. But it was enough for everyone to see that she was truly coming back. And for the first time in 6 months, Ethan felt that his family was reuniting again. St. Jude's Hospital had become the center of attention for all of Springfield. Reporters from national television stations camped at the entrance, while religious groups organized vigils nearby. Inside the hospital, the pressure on the medical team was immense. Dr. Edward Miller called an emergency meeting with the administrative board. "We need to make a decision," he said, his voice tense. "The situation is completely out of control." We have the Regional Medical Council asking questions, the press creating a circus, anatomy hesitated, and a patient who is actually improving inexplicably, Dr. Richard, who had spent the last few days trying to discredit what was happening, finally had to admit the facts. The exams don't lie. Elizabeth is responding in a way I've never seen in 20 years of medicine. And the boy? The director asked. Kian is debilitating, Dr. Helen replied with concern. It's as if every progress of Elizabeth's costs him something. I'm monitoring his vital signs, and they show signs of extreme exhaustion. Meanwhile, at Ethan's house, an even more surprising discovery was about to happen. Rose had decided to search for more information about Mark, Ethan's old friend. After much searching in old boxes, she found a telephone book from more than 15 years ago. "Ethan," Rose called, her voice trembling. "I found the number of the church where Mark worked inland. Father Anthony. Do you remember him?" Ethan took the phone book. Father Anthony. Yes, Mark mentioned he worked with him on social projects. But that was so long ago. I'm going to call, Rose decided. We need to know the truth. The call took a while to connect, but finally an elderly voice answered. "Father Anthony? I'm Rose. I work for Ethan Miller. Do you remember him? He was Mark's friend." "Ethan? Of course I remember. And Mark? My God, it's been so long. How are they?" "Father, it's about Mark. We need to know." "Did he have children?" But the silence on the other end was long. "Why are you asking about that?" It's complicated, Father, but it's very important. Mark did have a son. About 12 years ago, with a young woman from the community where we worked, but..." The priest's voice got lower. "There were complications during childbirth. The mother didn't make it, and Mark was devastated." Rose felt her heart race. "And the baby?" "Mark couldn't take care of the child. The pain was too great. He took the boy to an orphanage in Springfield and disappeared. We never heard from him again." "Father, which orphanage?" "St. Teresa's. It was run by nuns. I think it still exists." Rose hung up the phone with trembling hands. All the pieces were fitting together in a terrifying way. In the hospital, Kian was weaker than ever. Ethan had insisted that he rest, but the boy refused to leave Elizabeth's room for more than a few hours. "She's almost there," Kian said, holding Elizabeth's hand. "She just needs a little more help." Dr. Helen watched the monitors with growing apprehension. Elizabeth's brain activity was at almost normal levels, but Kian's vital signs showed worrying irregularities. "Kian, you need to rest," the doctor insisted. "Your body is showing signs of extreme exhaustion." "I can't stop now," he replied, his voice weak but determined. "If I stop, she might get lost again." It was at that moment that Patricia arrived at the hospital, carrying information that Rose had asked her to verify at St. Teresa's orphanage. "Ethan," she called, breathless from running up the stairs. "I got Kian's records from the orphanage." She opened a folder with old documents. "He was registered as Kian Mark Wilson. Date of birth, March 15th, 2013. Father, Mark August Wilson. Mother, Mary Jane Wilson, deceased in childbirth." The silence in the room was absolute, except for the sound of the medical equipment. "Mark Wilson," Ethan murmured. "He never told me his full last name. It was always just Mark." Kian looked at Ethan with tears in his eyes. "So it's true. You knew my father?" "I didn't just know him," Ethan replied, his voice choked with emotion. "He was my best friend. He was like a brother to me." Patricia approached Kian and for the first time hugged him. "That means you are family. For real." It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. As if she had heard the conversation, Elizabeth opened her eyes completely. Not for a few seconds, but definitively. "Dad?" Her voice was weak, hoarse from months of disuse, but unequivocally real. Ethan threw himself next to the bed, tears streaming freely down his face. "Elizabeth, sweetheart, you're back." Where was I?" she asked, confused, trying to focus her gaze. "You were sleeping for a long time," Patricia said, also crying. "But now you're back." Elizabeth tried to move and noticed Kian next to the bed. "Who are you?" she asked. I know you from somewhere." "I'm Kian," he replied with a weak smile. "We talked a lot while you were sleeping." "Talked? But I was dreaming. There was someone with me in the dream, someone who helped me not to get lost." Kian nodded. "It was me. I was there with you." Dr. Helen was in complete shock, checking and rechecking all the equipment. This is impossible. waking up from a deep coma like this so abruptly. Sometimes impossible things happen, Kian said, but his voice was getting weaker. It was then that Ethan noticed that Kian was very pale, almost translucent. "Kian, are you okay?" The boy smiled, but it was a tired smile. "I am, just very tired now." He started to stagger, and Ethan held him before he fell. "Dr. Helen!" Ethan shouted. The doctor rushed to examine Kian. His blood pressure was dangerously low and his pulse irregular. "We need to admit him immediately," she said, pressing the emergency button. As the medical team prepared a gurney for Kian, he held Ethan's hand. "Don't worry," he said weakly. "It was worth it. Elizabeth is back and now you are a family again." "You are our family too," Ethan replied. "You are Mark's son, and Mark was my brother. That makes you my nephew, do you understand?" Kian smiled. "Nephew? I never had an uncle before." As they took Kian to another room, Elizabeth tried to sit up. "Where are they taking him?" "He helped me. He needs to be okay." "He will be okay," Patricia said, holding her daughter's hand. "We are all going to be okay now." In the following hours, St. Jude's Hospital experienced unprecedented agitation. The news that Elizabeth had woken up from the coma spread quickly, further increasing the media pressure. But inside the hospital, all attention was divided between the miraculous recovery of a girl and the critical condition of the boy who had made it possible. Dr. Helen worked tirelessly, monitoring both Elizabeth and Kian. "It's as if his vital energy was transferred to her," she murmured to a nurse. "I've never seen anything like it." Ethan didn't leave the corridor running between the two rooms. In one, his daughter was recovering rapidly, relearning to use muscles that had been inactive for months. In the other, the boy he now knew to be the son of his best friend struggled to stay conscious. Rose arrived at the hospital with a bag of clean clothes and homemade food. "How are they?" she asked, hugging Ethan. "Elizabeth is getting better every day." "But Kian—" Ethan couldn't finish the sentence. "That boy saved our family," Rose said firmly. "Now it's our turn to save him." That night, while Springfield was buzzing with the news of the medical miracle, a new family was being formed inside the hospital. Not by the bonds of blood, but by something much stronger. Love, gratitude, and the certainty that some people enter our lives exactly when we need them most. And in 2 rooms at St. Jude's Hospital, a girl who had returned from the limbo between life and dreams, and a boy who had given everything of himself to bring her back, rested, knowing that finally they had both found the place where they belonged. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like. Tell us which city you are watching us from. We'll continue. 3 weeks had passed since Elizabeth's awakening, and the routine at St. Jude's Hospital was slowly returning to normal. The media had lost interest in the story after the first sensational weeks, but for the Miller family, those days had been the most transformative of their lives. Elizabeth was in physical therapy, relearning movements she had forgotten during the months in a coma. Her recovery was remarkable, but what impressed the doctors most was her positive attitude and her constant concern for Kian. "How is he today?" was always the first question she asked when Ethan came to visit her. Kian had stabilized after a few critical days, but his recovery was slower. Dr. Helen explained that the physical and emotional exhaustion he had suffered would need time to be fully overcome. "It's as if he gave a part of himself to save Elizabeth," the doctor explained to Ethan. "His body needs to relearn how to maintain its own energy." That September morning, Ethan found the two of them talking in the hospital garden. Elizabeth was in a wheelchair, still building strength, while Kian was sitting on a bench beside her. The scene made him stop for a moment, observing. "What are you two talking about?" he asked, approaching. "Kian was telling me about the dreams," Elizabeth replied. "He said that in the dreams there was a place where we could really talk to each other." "What was that place like?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. Kian thought for a moment before answering. "It was like a big house full of light, and it had a garden with lots of cats. Elizabeth loved playing with them there." Elizabeth smiled. "I remember. I dreamed of cats so many times. And there was always someone with me, someone who made me feel safe." Ethan felt a lump in his chest. In recent days, he had researched near-coma experiences about inexplicable connections between people. He hadn't found scientific explanations, but he had found many similar stories. People who somehow managed to connect beyond the physical world. "Kian," Ethan said, sitting on the bench beside him. Do you still feel these things? This ability to connect with other people? The boy shook his head. Not like before. It's like I used everything I had to help Elizabeth, but... He hesitated. Maybe it's better this way. It was very heavy sometimes. Patricia arrived at that moment, carrying a bag with new clothes for Kian. In recent days, she had dedicated herself to providing everything he needed, as if making up for lost time. How are my two favorite patients? She asked, kissing Elizabeth's forehead and stroking Kian's hair. Better every day, Elizabeth replied. Mom, when can we go home? Dr. Helen said maybe next week, Patricia answered, but only if you keep progressing like this. And Kian is coming with us, isn't he? Elizabeth asked, looking between her parents. Ethan and Patricia exchanged a look. In recent days, they had talked a lot about the future, about how to rebuild the family they had almost lost. Of course he is, Ethan replied. If he wants to, of course. Kian looked at each of them, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Are you sure? I never had a real family. Family isn't just about blood, Patricia said, echoing the words Ethan had said weeks before. It's about choosing to be present in each other's lives. And besides, Ethan added, you are Mark's son. That makes you part of our family a long time ago. We just didn't know it. Rose appeared in the garden at that moment, carrying a picnic basket. I thought you might be hungry, she said, setting the food on a towel on the grass. As they had an impromptu picnic in the hospital garden, Ethan watched his family gathered. Elizabeth laughed at the stories Kian told about his days on the street. Patricia organized the food with the maternal care she had forgotten to show, and Rose treated Kian with the same tenderness she had always dedicated to Elizabeth. Kian, Ethan said after a moment of silence, there's something I want to give you. He took a chain with a small, simple pendant from his pocket. It was Mark's. He gave it to me when we graduated, said it was to always remember our friendship. I think it belongs to you now. Kian carefully took the pendant, examining it. It was a small wooden cross, simple but laden with meaning. He wore this? He asked, his voice emotional. Always. He said it gave him strength to help other people. Like you did with me, Elizabeth said, taking Kian's hand. You gave me strength to come back. Dr. Helen joined them in the garden, carrying some folders. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said with a smile. Of course not, Doctor. How are the exams? Ethan asked. Excellent. Elizabeth is recovering extraordinarily, and Kian is stable. In fact, I have good news for both of you. She sat on the grass with them, something she had never done in 20 years of medicine. Elizabeth, you can be discharged on Monday. And Kian, you can go home today if you want. Home, Kian repeated, as if testing how the words sounded. Home, yes, Ethan said firmly. Home to our home. A week later, the house in Biltmore had returned to life in a way Ethan hadn't experienced in years. Elizabeth was in home physical therapy, but she could already walk with assistance. Kian had adapted surprisingly well to family life, although he still woke up scared some nights, as if he didn't believe it was real. Patricia had moved back home, and the couple was rebuilding their relationship based on the lessons they had learned in the last few months. Adversity had separated them, but Elizabeth's healing had united them more strongly. Dad, Elizabeth said during dinner one October evening, can I ask a question? But of course, sweetheart. Do you think Kian always knew he was Uncle Mark's son? Ethan looked at Kian, who was distractedly playing with the food on his plate. What do you think, Kian? The boy thought for a moment. I think a part of me always knew I belonged somewhere. When I saw you for the first time at the hospital, I felt familiarity, like I already knew you. And now? Patricia asked. How do you feel? Kian smiled, the first truly carefree smile Ethan had seen from him. Now I feel complete, like all the pieces are finally in the right place. Rose served dessert with tears in her eyes. This house was empty for so long, she said. Now it's full of life again. Months later, Ethan regularly received letters from people who had read about the family's story in the newspapers. Some recounted similar experiences. Others simply thanked them for sharing a story of hope. Dr. Helen had written an article about the case for an international medical journal, trying to scientifically document what she had witnessed. She concluded that, regardless of the medical explanation, love and human connection had a healing power that science was only beginning to understand. Elizabeth returned to school and constantly talked about her dream of becoming a vet. Kian, officially adopted by the Miller family, discovered a passion for drawing, and spent hours illustrating the dreams he still remembered from his days helping Elizabeth. And Ethan, who had started that journey as a desperate man who had lost everything, discovered that sometimes you have to be completely lost to find what really matters. On a sunny summer afternoon, the family was gathered in the backyard of the house. Kian had planted roses under Rose's guidance. Elizabeth was playing with a kitten they had recently adopted, and Ethan and Patricia watched their children with the silent gratitude of those who came very close to losing everything. "You know," Patricia said, holding Ethan's hand, "if someone had told me a year ago that our family would be like this, I would never have believed it." "Like this how?" Ethan asked. "Complete. More complete than it ever was." Ethan looked at Kian, who was teaching Elizabeth to take care of the plants, and smiled. "Sometimes miracles arrive in the most unexpected form." "And sometimes," Patricia added, "the miracles were the family we built along the way." That night, when the whole family was asleep, Ethan stayed awake for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of the full house. Soft footsteps in the corridor, the children's calm breathing, the soft purr of Elizabeth's cat. For the first time in more than a year, Ethan Miller slept in complete peace, knowing that his family was finally reunited, and that love had overcome all impossibilities. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Ethan, Elizabeth, and Kian has deeply touched your hearts. This story reminds us that family is not just about blood ties, but about choosing to be present in each other's lives, especially in the most difficult moments. To continue experiencing emotions like these, we have prepared a special selection of equally touching stories about love, redemption, and second chances. You can find them by clicking here next to us. If this narrative moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of human relationships. Don't miss our next content and tell us in the comments what moment in the story moved you the most. We look forward to seeing you in the comments to share these experiences together.